So welcome back again to the second part of Come and See Inspirations. My name is John Keelan, still joined by Shane Ambrose. And a reminder again for those who might want to contact us and maybe pass on some message or some comment, and maybe something you might something might just strike you here on the podcast. It's comeandseeinspirations@gmail.com. That's our email, comeandseeinspirations@gmail.com. Or text us at 087 466 8950. That's 087 466 8950 plus 353 outside of Ireland. Now, our next segment this week, we're going to include, or Shane is going to share with us, some thoughts, maybe reflections on maybe the funeral, the death of, the funeral maybe of Pope Francis. But more importantly, also he's going to share with us some information about the Synod. And the Conclave and so on and so forth. Shane, where do you want to go with that?
So I think we're going to start with a piece of music, John. So the first piece we're going to play is a piece called In Paradisium, which of course is the great prayer of commendation. And I think it's a good reminder to us that we are talking ultimately, of course, about the death of our brother, Jorge Bergoglio, otherwise known as Pope Francis. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as Pope Francis would probably say himself, his most common request to the lay faithful was, pray for me. So I think it's just a nice, just to ease us into it. That was In Paradisium. So we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about, just reflect on the funeral and some of the nuances of it, because some people have asked me, well, who was this and who was that and what did they do and why were they there and all the rest of it. So we obviously couldn't cover it in last week's podcast because we were recording midweek and the funeral was on the Saturday. So we're just going to go through the funeral today and then just hit the high notes in terms of a couple of things about the conclave, which begins on May the 7th. Now, the first thing I do have to correct is I was counting my days from last week and I counted on the day that the Pope died, which is wrong. The Cardinals, the 9 days of official mourning for the Pope start on the day of the funeral itself. And so that's when the 9 days, whereas I was miscounting, I thought it was from the day that the Pope died. But anyway, so last week, of course, as we know, Pope Francis died on the Monday, which was the 21st, John, wasn't it? Yes. Mm-hmm. So that was the 20th.
Yeah, that's right,
that was the 21st.
Yeah.
So obviously then the first thing we had to see from an official point of view was the declaration of his death by the Camerlengo, which of course is Cardinal Kevin Farrell. And the Irish are making a big song and dance, of course, because Cardinal Kevin was born in Drimna in Dublin. So that was the official certification of death. Now, whether or not the Camerlengo still bounces a silver hammer off of the Pope's dead head, we don't know, because the Vatican has denied that for a number of years. But anyway, that it was the official certification and notarization of the death, which took place after all the medical bits had been done.
Okay.
Now, Pope Francis had made a number of adjustments to the funeral, but to be fair, I think they were more in the nuance than in the substance.
Okay.
At the end of the day, the Pope is still the head of state of the Vatican. He's still the Pope. He's still the Bishop of Rome. We still had a lot of pomp and circumstance. But one of the changes there was the fact that the ceremony of certification of death took place in the chapel of the Casa Sancta Martha. So then on the Wednesday, Wednesday, the remains were moved to St. Peter's to allow for people to come and to pay their respects, including the heads of state, and our own President Michael D. Higgins and his wife Sabina were there on the Friday, accompanied by the Taoiseach and the deputy, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, who also attended the funeral on the Saturday. So the ceremony, I think they said something like 150,000 people went by to see the remains. The basilica had to be left open until 3 and 4 and 5 in the morning to allow the crowds to pass through. So the next kind of thing then, of course, was the ceremony of the closing of the coffin. And this one was pretty much done to ceremony. So what's involved is that the coffin is put down flat and is the Pope's face is covered by a white cloth, and then what they do is they incense the remains and sprinkle with holy water, and then there's a number of things put into the coffin. So there was a bag of coins and medallions, one for each year of the Pope's pontificate, and then there was the deed of his account of his life. It's called the deed. Big huge piece of parchment rolled up in a lead case, signed, sealed and delivered, and then added into the coffin. Now and then the coffin was sealed. Now, Pope Francis had taken away the need to have the 3 sets of coffins, all to intents and purposes like a Russian doll. But the coffin was still zinc lined, which was sealed, and then it was sealed obviously metallically, and then it was sealed with the seals of the Camerlengo and a number of the officials from the Vatican in wax, and then the lid was put on it. So it took, I'd say, 12 men of the papal household to lift it, and there was times when they were carrying it around St. Peter's and I wasn't quite sure whether or not they were going to fall over.
Why is it zinc lined? Do you know?
So my understanding of it is that and it goes back to the coins and the other thing, the deed being put in. So the idea is that it's to protect and preserve the remains of the deceased Pope, and the idea being that if there was to be a catastrophe, and the end of the world was nigh, or the remains got disturbed, how would you identify who was who? And this is the logic behind it. If the graves got mixed up for whatever reason, or the coffins got mixed up and you had to identify who it was. That's my understanding of it.
That's all right.
And obviously from the fact that, we believe in the resurrection of the body. So they wanted to keep things together as far as possible for the Vicars of Christ, all 267 dead Vicars of Christ. So, but now obviously, then we had the funeral mass on Saturday. I think there was 130 between them, heads of state, heads of government, and delegations. Interestingly, the one country who did not send a delegation was the People's Republic of China, which is a little strange considering the efforts that Pope Francis made in terms of outreach to the People's Republic of China, and also including this famous Vatican-Chinese deal on the appointment of bishops in China, which was probably honoured more in its breach than its observance by the Chinese, it has to be said. And then to add insult to injury, if you want, is the fact that on the 30th of April, just gone, the Chinese have just announced that they have elected and appointed a new bishop. Obviously, as anyone who knows anything about the Catholic Church knows, well, that doesn't happen without a pope, as it is the pope that appoints a bishop, and there is no bishops appointed during sede vacante. So it's just an interesting side piece to the whole dynamic of the relationship between China and the Vatican.
And I read somewhere that Israel didn't send their head of state. In fact, I think it was 3 or 4 days after the death of the Pope did they actually send a message of condolence.
Yeah, there was mixed. Yeah. I was like you. I read mixed messaging on that, so I'm not 100% sure, because I understand that maybe the Prime Minister had said something on his personal Twitter, but as officially as the State of Israel to the Holy See, yes, there was no delegation, and there was a degree of
I can understand why
delay. Yes, shall we say? They weren't exactly bosom buddies with Pope Francis, given everything that's going on in Gaza at the moment. So the funeral itself, of course, was in some ways, it was very familiar to any Catholic. There's, it's a funeral. It's as set out in the rites of that any of us would be buried under, in many respects. Except, of course, obviously, for the fact that the principal presider is the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Battista Re. Now, interestingly, the last time you would have seen a dean preside at a funeral like this, it would have been the man Joseph Ratzinger, before he was elected Pope Benedict XVI. However, Cardinal Battista Re is over 80, so he will not be taking part in the conclave. Which I'll come to in a while. But he gave the homily and the reflection and very much carried it out. I don't know. I was observing it and I thought the man looked very nervous, to be fair. But so would you if you knew the crowd that was there and the amount of people that were watching. So it's also, as I said, it was the first mass of the Novemdiales, which is the 9 days of mourning. And it's their daily masses to be held in St. Peter's throughout for the 9 days after. Obviously, the cardinals and the patriarchs, the Pope's coffin was brought down, and the cardinals, after the heads of state had come through. Just in terms of the heads of state, obviously we know President Trump was there from the US, President Macron from France, the presidents of Germany, the presidents from Finland, Estonia. Prince William represented his father, King Charles. The King of Spain and his wife, Queen Letizia, was there. So there was all sorts from all the crowned heads of Europe. There was a good representation, actually, of the Middle East delegations as well. It was something that someone asked me about, and was like, well, they're there as diplomats, if nothing else. So there was 130. And it was interesting. If you're looking at the altar, so if you look at the altar in the center, you had on the left hand side you had the cardinals in the red, and then on the right hand side you had the dignitaries predominantly in black, except for one or two very obvious exceptions. Just in case people were wondering, it was diplomatic protocol that everybody wear black, including black ties, and that the ladies would wear a veil. So that's why they were there. Interesting to note, President Joe Biden was in attendance, ex-former President Joe Biden and his wife, Dr. Biden, was in attendance as part of the US delegation as well. Someone asked me, who were the guys in purple at the back of the altar? So if you were looking at the altar, there was a bunch up in purple. My understanding is those were some of the canons of the chapter of St. Peter's Basilica. So they're the guys that look after the day-to-day stuff that goes on in St. Peter's. And that was my understanding. Now, I stand open to correction, but that's my understanding of it. Now, obviously then, looking at Cardinal Re's homily, the Dean very much recalls the highlight of Pope Francis's 12 years as Pope, and, of course, his great love for the church, a church open to everyone. And the Dean delved into many of the highlights of the 12 years. A Pope that touched the minds and hearts of many, the Good Shepherd, close to his people until the very end, and very much, of course, reflecting on that last public appearance in St. Peter's Square for the Urbi, after the Urbi et Orbi on Easter Sunday. Now, it was interesting. What I caught from Cardinal Re's homily was that final image we have of him, which will remain etched on our memory, is that of last Sunday when Pope Francis, despite his concerns, wanted to give us his blessing. He then came down to the square to greet the large crowd. It was very much saying it was very much Francis' own decision. Yeah. Now, an interesting Limerick connection, John. I always try to find something. We always try to find an Irish connection, and this one I've even got a Limerick connection for you. The last baby given to Pope Francis to be blessed in St. Peter's Square is from Limerick.
Is that right?
Yes. A baby from the O'Flynn family in Rathkeale.
Why?
There you go.
How did you find out that?
It was in the paper.
Read the papers, guys. Excuse me. Who needs to go to www?
Yeah.
Anyway, very good.
So then, going back to Cardinal Re's homily, he was a pope among the people with an open heart towards everyone, especially the marginalised, the least among us, but also a pope attentive to the signs of the times and what the Holy Spirit was awakening in the church. Of course, very much focusing on the call to mercy and also the call to human fraternity. And it was interesting, obviously, of course, then the whole thing about the appeals for world peace and the breaking down of barriers. So Cardinal Ray's homily wasn't too long. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised at the clip, the speed they went through. Actually, the ceremony didn't drag on for the mass. Then, of course, we got to the rites of commendation, which is the end, which is the step before the burial. Now, what was interesting actually about that for me was that it was very familiar to anyone that has gone to a Catholic funeral. There's no two ways around it. But what was interesting was the Roman twists in it. So it's in the Diocese of Rome, as part of the proceedings, you have some of the Litany of the Saints. And what they did was they prayed the Litany of the Saints, but they also invoked the papal saints. So the popes who are saints that are in the litany. So you were listening to St. John the 23rd, pray for him. St. Paul the 6th, pray for him. St. John Paul the 2nd, pray for him. So that was one element, and that was led by the Cardinal Vicar of Rome. Then, as well as that, then there was also the prayers in Greek, led by Patriarch Yusuf Abisi, who's head of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church, and he incensed Pope Francis's coffin. And they also led the prayer from the funeral office of the Byzantine liturgy. And then finally, Cardinal Ray sprinkled the coffin with holy water and incensed it again. And then it, of course, as we know, it was then transported to St. Mary's Major. So Pope Francis has been buried in St. Mary's Major, the Basilica of St. Mary Major, which is across the city from St. Peter's. The Marian Church, the Liberian Basilica, it's called, built by, I think it was Sixtus II, one of the Sixtuses anyway, and after the Council of Ephesus, which acknowledged Mary as Theotokos, Mother of God, which is quite an important understanding of Mary's role. And the reason, of course, it was defined was to bring home the understanding of the doctrine that Christ was both fully human and fully divine. The Basilica is an interesting one. It has it was a favourite of Pope Francis's, it has to be said. He used to visit it before and after each visit he made overseas. And one of the reasons for that, of course, was because he was visiting the icon of Maria Salus Populus Romani, Mary, Helper of the Roman People, which is a famous icon which is maintained in the Basilica. And people might remember it if you remember the prayer service that was on television during COVID, when Pope Francis gave an Urbi et Orbi blessing from that empty St. Peter's Square. So there was two things. There was this famous cross, which I can't remember the name of it now, but it was used against the plague. And then he had brought over the original of the icon of Salus Populus Romani. So it's that icon of Our Lady holding the Christ child. So it was. So he was being buried in the Basilica. So if you were watching it being brought in to bring the remains, the coffin being brought into the Basilica, there was a couple of individuals there in purple, guys with black hats and pom poms. So those were the canons of the chapter of the Basilica. So they're the Liberian Basilica. So they're the guys that run the Basilica. So they were there, and then a number of the cardinals attended because they had to verify the burial. So Pope Francis was being buried in a niche between two of the side chapels of the Basilica. His grave is in Ligurian marble, which is the same area from which his grandparents were from, and very simple, just his name, Franciscus. And the cross on the wall is a larger version of his pectoral cross that he used to use.
And of course, pilgrims can visit that now.
Yes, so the numbers, Mary Major is sometimes overlooked in terms of visits, but it's gone up, as you can imagine.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a number of years ago.
Indeed. It's an interesting one. The South American connection is actually the roof. Is the South American connection, because it's lined with gold brought by Christopher Columbus from South America, which was donated by Isabel and Ferdinand to Pope Alexander the Sixth, I think, and he gave it to the Basilica, so it's used to put on the roof. The Mary Major is famous as principally as the Basilica which holds the relics of the crib.
That's right, I remember that.
So they're under the high altar, 5 or 6 pieces of timber which are said to have come from Bethlehem. And so that's what we have in terms of Mary Major.
Is there a connection, or am I wrong? Is there a connection with Our Lady of the Snows?
It's the same, yes.
Yeah.
So the feast day of the dedication of the Basilica is our Feast of Our Lady of the Snows. The story being that the family that were donating it, give me 1 second now, John, put me on the spot. So the place where to put it, the Pope had a vision of where it was to go, and when he came out, he saw the hill covered with the snow.
And this was in the month of August.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the ceremony for the feast day is they will drop rose petals from the ceiling of the basilica.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our Lady of the Snows.
Yes.
Connection.
Yes, there's the connection.
Snow in August.
Exactly, snow in August.
In Rome. Okay.
So now we're moving on now to Conclave, and so now the Pope is buried, and so what happens next? So we have the gathering of the cardinals to come together to undertake their most solemn duty, which is the election of the new pontiff. There are about 235 cardinals, but there are only 135 cardinal electors. Now the difference is those over 80.
Age, yeah.
So if you're over the age of 80, you are excluded from being what's called a cardinal elector, and the definition is whether or not you're 80 on the day of the death of the Pope. So we have 135 cardinal electors, of which 2 are not able to travel due to ill health. So there's 133 electors that will be going into the Sistine Chapel for the purpose of the conclave. Their average age is about 70.4 years. The youngest cardinal is 45, and as far as I know, that's the man from Australia, the Ukrainian bishop. That was made a cardinal. Yes. 108 of the cardinals have been appointed by Pope Francis. 20 to 25 of them were appointed in the December consistory that was just held. Of the 135 that are there, 14% are from Italy, 29% are from the rest of Europe, 14% are from Africa and the Middle East, 16% are from Asia and the Pacific, 9% are from North America, and 18% are from Latin America. So the numbers have changed over the years. The percentage of the voting cardinals from Italy has declined. The number has gone up. At one stage, you only had 20 cardinals going back along. So the reforms then, predominantly by Paul VI, said that there would be 120 cardinal electors. However, popes have generally breached that because they've allowed for turnover, for debt, for people turning 80. And basically, the cardinals actually confirmed on Wednesday that basically in line with the constitution, which governs the running of the conclave, which is called Universi Dominici Gregis, which was written or proclamated by John Paul II and amended by Benedict XVI and Francis. They've just confirmed that while the limit is set as 120, the Constitution also says any cardinal who has officially been declared cardinal and is under the age of 80 is entitled to vote. So there will be 133 participating in conclave. Now, conclave will begin on May the 8th. May the 7th, I beg your pardon. And that is, so then what will happen? So it'll begin with Mass for the election of the Supreme Pontiff. But between now and then, what happens? So the cardinals are gathering in general congregations. That's where all of them meet together, generally in the Synod Hall. And they're discussing and talking and listening to what are the things that are causing concern, what are the areas of issues for the church. There was a day where they were discussing the economic situation facing the church. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for that particular presentation. So there was, so it was an interesting. Cardinal Marx, who's the coordinator of the Council for the Economy, presented several challenges, issues and proposals. And I said I definitely would like to have seen that particular report. So the secrecy is the thing. So all the cardinals can attend the general congregation.
Yeah, okay.
So during the general congregation, particular congregations will be selected. So that is, they will draw by lot one cardinal from the group who are known as the cardinal bishops, one cardinal from the group that are known as the cardinal priests, and one one cardinal from the group that are known as the cardinal deacons, and they will work for the They will work with the Camerlengo on the day-to-day operational things that have to be decided, and they're in post for 3 days, and then it's rotated again and elected again. And that continues on. So the dean usually manages the conclave inside in the Sistine Chapel. The Camerlengo basically manages everything outside the Sistine Chapel. That's kind of the split. Now, someone asked me, well, what about the film, The Conclave? Well, I said, I haven't seen the film. I've read the book. My understanding, though, is that the film kind of took a shortcut because they made the Camerlengo also the dean. But in the current situation, they're two separate people.
Okay, right, okay. They don't get it past you. Okay,
Yeah,
well
so there was some corners, but now that can happen that the dean is also the Camerlengo, but it's unusual. So there's mass on the morning it begins. A final meditation is given to the electors, and then they process into the Sistine Chapel to the hymn Vini Creator Spiritus. The electors then once more take their oaths, and then it's omnes extra, everyone out. So who they're left inside is the cardinal electors, the papal master of ceremonies, and one or two other priest assistants to help with the running of things inside, a doctor, a nurse, all of whom are sworn to secrecy, and then the doors are shut. And they get down to vote. So on the first day, there is one vote in the afternoon. After that, then, there are 4 votes each day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon.
So when they go into this, so have they done all the talking, discussing prior to that? So when they go in for the actual conclave inside the chapel, it's just for voting, or do they have chats about? I mean, might have a vote in this, and we don't know, do we?
We don't really know. They don't talk about it. They're not supposed to talk about it. But my understanding, my understanding is that for those that have said something about it, that it generally tends to be a rather prayerful event. Because what happens is you go up one by one, you write your name on the piece of paper that you're voting for, you roll it up, and you process up, and you declare, I John Keeley, declare before Cardinal, declared before God, blah, 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 and you put your vote into the urn. So then that's tipped out, it's counted to make sure that there's 133, not 134, and then it's actually called out who gets what votes. And then if there's no one elected, so they need 2/3 plus 1 to be elected Pope. If there's no one elected, then the votes and all the bits of paper are gathered up and they're burnt in the stove, and that's where we get the black smoke.
It's. I mean, I can understand how you mentioned early on during the funeral. Was it Cardinal Ray? He seemed a bit nervous to you. Well, I'd imagine any cardinal going into that conclave would be very, very nervous with the onerous position of the Pope of the Church.
Well, yes.
And that's why the prayers is vital.
And if you think about it, they're sitting there watching each other going up to cast their votes, and they're looking up at Michelangelo's Last Judgment.
Yes.
Now, I don't care what you say, but if you're kind of looking at that, it's got to start to, the gravitas of the situation, will eventually impact, So what happens then if they can't get a 2/3 majority needed, and it goes on for 3 days of voting? Then they take a break for prayer and reflection. They're encouraged to have informal discussions and a brief spiritual exhortation. And then it goes back again and it continues on. In the event of a deadlock after 33 rounds of voting, so 1, that's 32, 4, 32, that's 8 days. 8 days. Then there's a runoff. So the new Pope, but how long it's going to take us, it just depends. Because Pope Benedict was elected the day after the conclave began, whereas the 1268 conclave lasted for 2 years and 9 months.
But Francis was only a day or two, was he a day?
I think it was 2 days, yeah. Now, personally, myself, I think it will go okay. The longest conclave since in 1900 was the 1922 conclave, which elected Pope Pius the 11th, all right? But either way, they're going into conclave on the 7th. You probably will be looking at a new Pope, the latest, the 14th of May. And so you'll probably be looking at a mass for the installation of the Pope, probably third week of May, probably. We'll see how we go. But it's an interesting one. I personally myself think it will be a longish conclave. I think it will take a couple of days because one of the reasons is that the cardinals don't really know each other, and they are from very wide and varied places, which is a bit unusual compared to previous conclaves. And of course, the fact that there are 20 newbies in there, give or take, who were only appointed in December, so they won't know anyone.
But in these days before that, I mean, aren't they chatting to each other, having dinners, having...
They are, and having so on and so forth. But like, it's, you know, as you said yourself, it's still an onerous responsibility, you know, and all the rest of it.
Okay.
So,
Fair
but
enough.
and also trying to discern, well, who's going to be the person and what do they want them to do and all the rest of it. There is, yeah, go on, John.
A question, sorry. Almost immediately after the new Pope accepting
Yes.
position, right?
So how that works. So what happens is the votes are called out,
Yeah.
and then it's supposed to be the Cardinal Dean, but in this case it'll be the most senior Cardinal Bishop, Cardinal Parolin, who will go down and he will stand in front of the individual and say, do you accept your election as Supreme Pontiff? And the minute the Cardinal says yes, he's no longer a Cardinal, but he is the Bishop of Rome, and he is the Pope. Fait accompli. If there was never anything else done at that stage, he is Pope.
Now, the question I was going to ask is, at that stage, I believe, following that, he's asked what name.
Yes.
Now, I mean, do all these guys probably think of a name before they go? Do you know?
God knows. Maybe they do. Francis was said not to have thought of one, but it was one of the Brazilian cardinals.
The Brazilian guy,
cardinal
yeah.
was saying, "Don't forget the
I mean,
poor,"
the poor.
and that's supposed to have triggered his thought
But that's
process.
but that was in a split second. Time,
Yeah.
isn't it? Anyway.
I suppose it depends.
I'm just thinking this.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. Like, I think myself that Pope Benedict had kind of indicated he had given it some consideration.
Yes.
But, you know, Joseph Ratzinger wasn't a fool. And there was a lot of support when he was
of
elected,
course.
you know. So,
Whereas Francis went in, the
yeah,
idea
he was
about
an
the poor and so on
yeah,
and so
but
forth.
he,
Anyway,
and he was an unknown.
it was a natural
yes,
thing for him.
Yes.
Maybe Francis. Okay.
Yes. So now what's interesting is, of course, obviously outside, everybody loses their jobs. So all of the heads of the dicasteries have lost their jobs. So the secretaries have to keep things running, except for the Apostolic Penitentiary, the Camerlengo, and there's a third one whose name I can't remember. But it's an interesting. So it's an interesting process. So when the cardinal says he accepts the election and then he's announced what name you'll be known, then he's taken into the room at the side, which is known as the Room of Tears, and he's kitted out in the white cassock, and then the cardinals come up to give their homage, and then it depends what happens. So sometimes at that stage, the ballots will be burnt and we'll get the white smoke and the bells will ring and they'll tell us we have a new pope, and then it takes them a while to decide whether or not they're going to come out on the balcony and announce the news. So then what's supposed to happen is the cardinal, the head, the oldest of the head of the cardinal deacons is the one that's supposed to come out on the balcony and say, "Annuncio vobis gardum habemus papam." So I announced with joy great news, we have a pope, and he'll say, Jorge O Cardinal Bergoglio, taking the name of Francis, and then the whole world will go berserk and all the rest of it. So it's an interesting one. So it's an interesting process. As I said, they are very much kind of before God in terms of trying to make a decision. And a lot of the cardinals have kind of, those that have done interviews, have very much actually, it's been a theme that has come out, that has emerged in terms of the conclave itself. Now, I suppose the other thing just to mention, I suppose, is it's that from the moment he says yes, the man has the job. He's immediately Bishop of the Church of Rome, and because he's Bishop of the Church of Rome, he's through Pope and head of the College of Bishops according to canon law. He acquires and can exercise full and supreme power over the universal church, and the conclave ends immediately, unless the new Pope says otherwise. After all, that's the point, he's in charge. So I just have to acknowledge, for support just for people, one of the things we recommended last week was the Pillar. So there was a lot of very good articles on the Pillar website which helped pull together all that information that we've just gone through, myself and John, in terms of the conclave itself. Now, one thing, however, which I do want to bring up, this is all happening far away in Rome, and it's on the television, and it's good spectacle. And, you know, they say the two institutions that still do pomp and circumstances the best are the royals in the UK and the Catholic Church, which is fair enough. And it can seem a bit distant from all the rest of us. But there is a role for the lay faithful in all of this. Yeah. And there was a great article, an interview, done with Bishop Eric Varden. Now, Eric Varden is one of the bishops in Norway, and he's a very interesting character. He's a Norwegian Trappist monk, author, beer aficionado, and they do interviews with him on the Pillar from time to time. And I have to say, I always look forward to it when I see them coming up, because they do give you food for thought. And it's one of the things he makes. One of the points he makes out is that, you know, we all have a role to play in terms of conclave, because we are called on to support the cardinals in prayer.
Yeah.
And there's we recite the prayer designated as a collect in masses for the Pope to be elected, and it's a way for us to pray for him personally before we have the least idea of who he is. God, as eternal pastor, you govern your flock with assiduous protection. Grant your church and your boundless kindness that pastor who will best please you by his holiness and be of most benefit to us through unsleeping solicitude. And it's a good prayer for us to pause and reflect on as the cardinals enter into conclave on the 7th. So, John, with that, we'll put links into the notes to a couple of articles that caught our eye. Again, the recommendation from us this in terms of people that want to follow up on things like this is to follow the likes of the Vatican's own website, which does a very good job. Rome Reports does nice videos if you want to have a quick look. And then the Pillar is the other particular outfit that we are giving our imprimatur to in terms of good coverage, and we would highly recommend. So, as I said, in terms of conclave, we have a role which is to pray for the cardinals as they make the decision before God and the world as to who's going to lead the church. And to finish out this part of this week's podcast, I thought it would be appropriate for us to have the same hymn/prayer that the cardinals are going to listen to as they process into the Sistine Chapel, which is, of course, the Veni Creator Spiritus.